But here we go. I believe that is going, and you should have received notification that it started recording. Awesome. I am also going to share my screen. I'll share the whole screen because that just makes it slightly easier. And we should be able to go into view, slideshow. Can everybody see my screen and still hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. I actually know how technology works. This is awesome. Okay. So hello. I'm Shahun. Jeffrey is also fine in English. I'll take both of them. And I am doing, this is my first time doing something like this, so please bear with me if there are a couple bumps along the way, a class on Irish language and the subversion of power. So the purpose of this is kind of twofold. One is because I want to share the experience I've gained in various forms of activism and advocacy with people, because I want to help empower people with whatever I can do, because that's a whole lot more powerful than what I can do as an individual person if I'm able to share some of that. Two, Irish is oddly powerful for this sort of stuff, even when you're not campaigning for the Irish language. So that's one thing that while there are a lot of you'll see a lot of things about activists and advocacy training, I haven't seen any of that put out about how to use Irish for this. And so the purpose here is to make it very clear, very obvious how we can use Irish to this end, and quite often do that very, very effectively. So that's kind of the purpose of why I'm putting this together. Quick overview of what's going on today. The general purpose of this is going to be what I talk about first. Primarily subversion of power with Irish. And I'm going to go through a couple case studies of why I think this is important. After that, I'll go through some of the major tools. Each one of these tools will be the section of one of the full classes I'm doing. There are going to be 6 classes total. So I'm going to have a full class dedicated, for example, to the FOI Act, a full class for GDPR, a full class for the Official Languages Act. And I think the last few ones there will actually probably be able to be lumped together because there's a little bit less to say about them in some ways. And how those can be used independently in any language, as well as how they can be used through Irish in a very powerful way. These laws primarily apply to the Republic of Ireland. For people in the north of Ireland, 6 counties, there will often be similar legislation, but it won't necessarily be identical. And the same goes for other countries if you're looking at anywhere else in the European Union or beyond. A lot of countries have things like an FOI Act, but it's not universal. So this will vary based on the jurisdiction. And then obviously I'll get into things like press releases, rhetorical tools, how to organize and how to speak and protest with the language as well, because that's also a very important facet of it. And then at the last part, it is going to be the part where I teach a bit of the language itself to help you get a basis in how to use it. A lot of that is going to be around templating and using template statements, because once you have a basic grasp of the language, it's very, very easy to fill in the blanks in a template, and that can be very powerful. In fact, that's what I do for about half of the things that I do with Irish that involve writing, at least. Any questions on that as we get started? No, seems like not. I should also, wow, first mistake of the morning. A little bit about myself. You guys probably care to know who this random guy on Zoom is. Yeah, I'm Shakun. I'm originally from San Diego in the States. I picked up Irish while I was there, kept learning it when I moved to Ireland. And when I came to Ireland, I started up a PhD. Very quickly realized that PhD conditions aren't necessarily sublime, and have become very active in a workers' right, like a workers' union for PhDs since then, the Postgrad Workers Organization. And a lot of the things that I'm going through here are things that I've directly used in that campaign to pretty great effect. I've also done a lot of advocacy and campaigning around climate change and Irish language rights. So I've seen a few different sides of this. The one thing I'm going to say about this is the purpose of this class is not for me to push political ideology on you. It is for me to show you how to use these tools. It's going to be made public so anybody can see it. So the purpose is simply to say, here's how to empower yourself. You can believe whatever you would like. So there we go. That said, the case studies I have are about things I've done, so they will somewhat or end up aligning with ultimately my own views to some extent. That's a kind of unavoidable bias there. Anyway, to get off of that and go into what's going to matter very heavily for this, the goals of this course, I went through this a bit already. The most important thing is personal empowerment. I want people who watch this online or who are here now to come out of this with a sense of, here is something more I can do. And there's going to be more text on the slide that seems to have not gotten there, so I will summarize this in speaking, which is once again about, it's not for me about how you use this, it's about knowing how to do rights-based campaigning and advocacy, and about being able to push that forwards and be strong with that. Why Irish? Why would we choose Irish? Why not do this in English? Why even care about the language there? A large part of it, I mean, Irish as a minority language has a weird amount of benefits. And one of the things you'll realize once you start speaking Irish is that its culture is very anti-imperial, typically very progressive, and the people who are using this language tend to have a very good respect for subversion of power. And you see a lot of those elements within it and a lot of people who can use it that way. So there's very strong culture to build off of there of people who use the language for the sort of advocacy and activism. The second point, Irish has way more legal rights than most people expect. It's defined as the quote-unquote first primary language of Ireland in law. It isn't in the de facto setting, obviously. But this means it has a very large suite of legal rights, tying into the fact that Irish is neglected in the government. And that's not done out of malice, but quite conveniently, it's done out of laziness. What this means is that every public body essentially is in violation of the law with respect to the Irish language and cannot fulfill their obligations for one reason or another. This immediately gives you power over those organizations when you're dealing with Irish, because now, for example, let's say you are communicating with an organization and for some reason you need to ask them a question, and maybe because of a certain campaign, you realize it looks a whole lot worse for them if they simply cannot answer this question, as opposed to if they get a chance to give a really kind of political speak answer that says nothing but might undermine a press release you're putting out. Ask them in Irish. They won't notice you sent it for a year later. But since every public body advertises that they can do everything through Irish, they are functionally, since they are lying in that respect, they can't argue against this. And if they answer, wonderful, you've just promoted the Irish language in this organization. So it's a lot of stuff like that. You can use it very tactically. You can use it similarly. You submit a request and they don't reply. That's a violation of the law. If you submit a freedom of information request to them. And so all of a sudden, you can use that to undermine credibility, to question what they're doing in an area, this sort of stuff. You immediately get to use this sort of stuff against these institutions. Obviously, there are ways to do this deceptively, there are ways to do it honestly. I would suggest doing it honestly. I can't control what people do with this knowledge, but there is a line to walk there between tactics and honesty. And I would, definitely recommend on the record, please do this in the honest way. But it's a very powerful tool there for that alone, that every public body is in violation of the law. Fourth point, minority languages are cool. I like minority languages. I think we should have more of them. And it never hurts to do that. I always end up feeling kind of good when I get to use a bit of Irish for helping out with stuff like this. So, couple examples here. What you see on the right here, this is a kind of textbook case of how, how these public bodies tend to disregard Irish. Actually, in this case, a private body. This is a memo sent out by a corporation that was working in the Gaeltacht, the Irish language region of Ireland, where everything is required to be allowed in Irish, public and private. They don't ban languages, but everything has to be permitted to be using Irish. And this company sent out a memo saying that failure to speak English was unacceptable to all of their employees in that region. And this was actually, like I said, a private body, but the public body, Úras na Gaeltachta, overseeing this, somehow didn't catch this until this memo was released. And so when this came out, there was a huge backlash to it. And stuff like this comes out every couple weeks if you're keeping up to date in a lot of the Irish language media. So that's the sort of stuff I'm talking about here, about this tacit, almost lazy violation of the law in a lot of these cases. I think this is okay, cool. Any questions on that stuff before I move on? Feel free to put it in the chat or just say anything. Okay, awesome. Next point. I've got a couple QR codes here because it's probably easier on the slides. The first case study I wanted to walk you through is about, it's one case where I wasn't at this protest, unfortunately. It's about subverting a lot of nationalist attacks that were being used against immigrants and refugees in Ireland. Essentially what happened is, and I'll pull up the video in 1 second, you had a group of counter-protesters against a protest that was pushing for essentially getting rid of immigrants in Ireland. And what happened is one of these people at the protest comes up to the counter-protesters and asks if he could have a civilized conversation with him, to which the counter-protester responded exclusively in Irish, "I'm not going to speak with you unless you can speak to me in Irish." And this video went viral afterwards. It got attention in national media, just something that you never would have seen had this been done exclusively in English, because it was using Irish, this gained attention, this gained traction, because you had somebody here who is Irish himself, but was not white, and who was using this as subverting this, and suddenly everyone looked at this and said, you know, this is something powerful, this is strong, and it garnered a lot of attention for that cause. It also, as I put here, it immediately is something that counters the idea that these nationalist protests are quote unquote Irish first, because those protests fundamentally were disregarding the language. The people there couldn't even speak it. As I mentioned, it got huge publicity. And one of the biggest things that a lot of protesters want to do is to get publicity for their demands. Once your demands are out there, it's, you know, it's in kind of the communal eye, you tend to see oftentimes a lot more compassion, a lot more support, or at least more potential for that stuff coming up. And the person in charge of this DARA immediately took control of the narrative, because while a counter protest can often be characterized by what it's protesting, in this case, this subversion here allowed him to take control of that narrative and define not what was being protested against, but what the, you know, what the counter protesters, what the people siding for immigrant rights were standing for. And because of that sort of narrative shift, all of a sudden you see that there's a lot more control from his side of this. I'm going to see if this is going to be nice and pop up for me. Oh, that's the wrong link. That I could show you real quick. This video here. Let's pause this. This was posted publicly onto X, formerly Twitter. Can you guys see the screen? Okay, I'm gonna hope the sound comes through okay. I'm gonna show this one to you real quick.
Hey, young man, would you do an interview? I'm gonna do an interview. Have a civilized conversation. What is it, Chacha? I'm with you. Neil Higgins to Belga. Were you sent by an NGO? Did an NGO bring you here? Hey, Stockton, it's Iron Coggin and Son, not will Gelga, Nino Shunok, Ni Rip Lunok, or say a Gwyneth Carty and Ganon dinner, Neil Grelger Bega, Tararas Armagan, Toke the Quick Grelga last August. On floor. Speak Irish. That's correct.
Philip Dwyer came to Clondalkin yesterday to continue his hate campaign against refugees. I made fun of him for not being able to speak Irish, not as a jab against non-Irish speakers, but to point out, if the far right care about Ireland so much, they should probably spend more time learning the language and less protesting immigrants. In a similar fashion, they pretend to care about the housing crisis so that they can direct that anger towards immigrants rather than at the top. So I hope to see everybody at the Cost of Living March on the 7th of October. Details below.
there we go on that. What came out of this, the link I should have clicked on second, because it was labeled 2, quite sillily, was you actually saw within a day of this, there was national media attention. This is from the Journal. You immediately saw national media attention coming onto this. And there was this entire interview here with Dara and with a lot of the people he'd been campaigning with. And if you read through this, you'll see that he actually took control of this narrative going forwards. The narrative being set about this protest, about a little bit of the issue in general, was suddenly something that he was able to shape in the way that, you know, could get his demands and points put forwards. So there's the video again there. There's that. I will leave that. If you would like to read it, you can take a look at the QR code of the link there afterwards. I will share the slides around. That was kind of the first one I wanted to go through. Any questions, thoughts on that so far? Any questions on what I've said? No? Okay, cool. I will leave that there. I'm going to do a small break after we get through the second case study, but we can move on to there now. Second case study. This is one I was directly involved in, so I can speak to this in a way a lot more inside level. And this one is about what happens when you have one person who's trying to push back against an entire institution. This is obviously, there's a massive power imbalance. When you've got a single person who's trying to resist an action an institution has taken, what you see is that it's hard for that person to gain a lot of traction simply because they're one person. And oftentimes in these cases, it's hard to get things into media because there's so many cases of institutions, you know, taking advantage of individuals that simply don't make it out there. So what happened here? Essentially, what happened here is that around 6 months ago now, something like that, I went on to foi.gov.ie and I automatically scraped every single FOI-able public body and their email address. I then sent out approximately the ones that actually made it out, the ones that were in the correct formatting and all, that worked properly, was approximately 239 emails, if I recall correctly, to over 200 different public bodies with a very basic FOI in English. I said public bodies typically are required to have some sort of climate action plan. Could you please send that to me, as well as the cost associated with implementing it? That's something FOI in Ireland very easily. The costs associated with it are not typically going to be published publicly, but they're required to disclose this in an FOI. So it's a kind of perfect thing to send out. And around 3 months later, when all the responses were back, I saw that well over a third simply didn't issue a response. Several of them had actively tried to refuse to engage with me in Irish, whereas I'd submitted these applications in Irish. And there are quite a few other problems there of things like, you know, invalid or outdated email addresses, basically something pointing to the system not really working there. When I got this information back, the first thing I did was to look at the ones that had been actively against Irish, and I sent that out to media. What came out of this is that the data that I got, not only about the neglect of the Irish language, but about the inability of public bodies generally to respond in Irish, made it not only in local news. UCD was one of the worst offenders for this, for not allowing Irish, made it into the UCD's local student media. Not only did it make it there, but we also saw this published nationally in the Irish Times. This is published in the Irish language version of the Irish Times, so it's the audience it's reaching is going to be an audience that already knows about these issues to a large extent, but it still made it into a national news source. And if you go down a bit here, I'm not finding it right now. You'll see, oh yeah, 219 was the number. You'll see a lot of the numbers that I had cited there, 37% not that couldn't respond properly in Irish, and you see that all being published there. So another point about how using this, when you catch companies, public bodies violating the law, that becomes a very strong press release and that gets attention. And so that's the sort of thing that I'm looking at here, is how do we push back against this sort of stuff? How do we push back against these institutions. And this is really the goal of this course, is to let you know how you can use Irish in these capacities in a way that maybe you wouldn't have before. I've gone through this already. I think I had a few points here about you can use this to question credibility of institutions, to show their disrespect for various rights, and to bring to attention national level non-compliance with law, which, quite frankly, with respect to Irish, is a lot stronger than what implemented rights end up being. So, any questions on that? Any comments on that at all? Looks like not. Okay, cool. In that case, what time move out right here? Okay, cool. Perfectly to where I want to be right now. So I'm going to take a step back here. And the first thing is, so up to this point, the hope is that you look at this and you realize there's something here. There's something that can be done. The rest of this lesson is about teaching you how to do those things, how to make something happen with this, and what those actual tools are. How do you recognize the places where you can, where you can start a campaign? How do you recognize the places where organizational power is weakest? How do you recognize places where you can start using Irish in a way that subverts things? That's what this is about. I'm going to actually skip to the next slide. The tools I'm going to be covering in this course generally are these ones. Freedom of Information Act. In short, this means that the information collected by a public body, their expenditures, their communications internally and with other public bodies, essentially anything that is not personally identifiable information, is something that you are allowed to FOI. And when you FOI it, they have to send you the information you requested or give you a reason that that information cannot be obtained. It's a very powerful act for any sort of activism advocacy, because it allows you to catch institutions in lies. It allows you to request information that they're trying to refuse to make public, to expose things, to make things more transparent. GDPR. The GDPR is your best friend if you're campaigning for the Irish language. Reason for that is that a lot of the violations of Irish tend to be violations of GDPR rights. You have a right to have your name spelled correctly under the GDPR, but most organizations don't actually respect that. And so very immediately, as soon as you see things being misspelled, miswritten, misattributed in Irish, you can look at that as a violation of GDPR. The Official Languages Act is what spells out Irish language rights in Ireland. Obviously, that's going to be useful. One of the most useful aspects of this is that if you send out a memo communication to a public body, they're required to respond to you in the language you send it to them, if that language is English or Irish. So if you send something in Irish, they are fully required to handle all complaints, issues, discussions in that language, which really means when you combine it with the FOI Act, you can get something very strong there. Parliamentary questions. These are harder to do because you have to have a friend in the Dáil who's willing to submit a parliamentary question for you. But to put here that you can see the answers to previous questions. So if you're part of a larger group, using parliamentary questions and then getting responses on the record is something you can use as well. That immediately gets things on the record. You can quote this, you can look at this. Unfortunately, there's no right, if you ask a parliamentary question in Irish, there is no right or expectation that they have to respond in Irish as well, unfortunately. But it is still a way of doing this, and there are a lot of people who are, especially if you're part of an organization, are very happy to submit parliamentary questions on your behalf, because the way political positioning works, a lot of these, non-governmental parties really want to be seen supporting anything that goes against the current government. Last one, the language commissioner. When there's a violation of Irish language rights, they're the person you go to. There are a lot of also ombuds people. Like you'll see, like Press Council Ireland is the press ombudsman, and you can file official complaints with them. And once again, that can be in Irish or English regarding different institutions. This doesn't go into the things you use, quote unquote, on the streets when you're protesting. That is something I'm going to cover later, because the strategies and the way you use Irish there are very different. And I'm going to introduce that a bit later in the course once you've got a bit more comfortable with using the language itself, because a lot of that stuff involves more spontaneous speaking, a little bit less preparation and speeches. So you need a bit more Irish to go through that. So skipping back to what I skipped over there. The point here is that the law is almost too powerful in favor of people who can use Irish. And by too powerful, I mean more powerful than the government intends. And so you have a lot of power here once you start doing that. And the whole thing here is about knowing the rights that you have and how to push that forwards. So there we go. Just a quick note, next week's on the FOI Act, I'll send this out in an email. I'm going to do essentially a deep dive into that, what it means, how you use it. A lot of that's going to be applicable to just general use, and then some of it will be very applicable to when you're doing the stuff in Irish. Just a quick note. Okay, does that all make sense? Are people kind of happy with what I've gone over here? I think I see nods. Wonderful. Okay, so that is essentially the kind of first half of this, where I'm looking at basically, why do we care about this? What's the culture of this? The rest of this is going to be about the second part of this, the Irish language. We're going to put a pin on the subversion of power for a second and just say, how do we use enough of this language to actually do that subversion? So quick overview. I'm unfortunately unable to make you fluent in the course of this class. I wish I could. I can't do that, sadly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to teach basic structures of the language, and also make sure that make available templates that are very accessible and easy to use once you've got some basic Irish, for things like press releases, FOIs, and eventually shorter speeches that you want to be able to do in Irish in various ways. So the idea being that at the end of this, if you end up in a situation like Dara did in the first case study of counter-protesting an anti-immigrant protest, if you end up in a position like I did, where you want to run a large FOI campaign and write a press release on it, if you end up in a case where you just want to give a speech and use Irish, there will be templates for all those things, and it'll be relatively easy to kind of plug in words to make it say exactly what you'd like it to say. Of course, in order to do that, you need to have some basic Irish. And so that's the point of these lessons, is to give you that basic Irish to do that. A couple of things. Duolingo for Irish is phenomenal. Well, phenomenal. It's a good start. It generally is right, and it's free, which is a lot better than a lot of other things out there. The two I have on the right here, Changlin.ie and Nuolairish, are probably the two best references, but especially Nuolairish can feel a bit textbooky. It's not necessarily the place you learn the language, but if you have a question, these are both perfect for it. The basics I'm going through, it's not all grammar. Really what I'm looking at here is relatively simplified grammar, which is the present and the past, the two ones that you actually use very commonly in this kind of communication, and very declarative sentences. If you're writing an FOI, you'll end up saying something like, I'm requesting documents about X, and you can place X with whatever you want, because that's 90% of the Irish you end up using these situations. And between Nuolairish and Changlin and some of the basics I'll give you here, that'll be more than enough to cover all of that use. So a quick note on templating. This is a mini template I've got on the right here for FOIs. I use it myself so much. The point of this, like I said, is to put a very easy plug and play in to, here's how you construct a request in Irish, here's how you do this. Because if you're not speaking in a live situation, you can just take a template, copy, paste a few words in, you're happy. I do this all the time myself, like all the time. Everything I do, I've got templates for, and it works. So I'll be making these public as we go. When we actually get next week to the FOI lesson, I'll actually have a better FOI template here. This one isn't complete, but functionally it shows you, here's the information that's being asked for, and I'll have, when I present the templates next lesson, I'll have it side by side, English, Irish, so you know the exact equivalency in there. There you go with that. Here's the part that's about actually using Irish. How do we actually do this? A quick note on phonetics. There are two ways to teach phonetics. I can go through a bunch of rules that are going to be interesting. Like, Irish is very phonetic of a language, but its writing system is very different from most others. Or the more natural thing I can do is redirect you to Changlin, where they have a pronunciation of every word in the language. And if you have any doubts, you can just see how it's pronounced there. That's a really easy way to do this. If you're doing this and a bit of Duolingo, you'll be fine on pronunciation, and we'll do some practicing here to help people get into that. You can kind of pick up on the patterns yourself, and when something particularly weird or different comes up, I'll clarify that specifically in the words we're looking at. The very, very basics of this. Starting off with a few common phrases here, and we will then go through these and kind of dissect them. So the first one here is Misha, and then your name. It's Misha Shaprun. You know, it's Misha Jeffrey. It's Misha Sean. It's how you say who you are. What we're looking at here. So you'll notice that I say instead of Missa, Misha, an S next to an I or an E tends to be a sh sound. One thing to pick out there. And it's just for introducing yourself. Is the word is functionally. Use it when you're expressing identity. And Misha is me. Second one here, and I'm doing this very intentionally. The next slide is going to break down the actual grammar of this. The next one here, the next three here actually are pointing out something very different, which is how you say is in a different context. In almost every other context other than Ismisha Shahrun, you use the word ta. Ta means to be in a more temporary sense, or in a way that isn't fundamentally to my identity. You know, you would say it for ta kyarta agum. So ta and then kyarta, the CE is one vowel sound. The E just means pronounce the C as if there's a Y after it. And then the sound you make there is ah. So ta kyarta agum. Agum is pronounced pretty much exactly as you would expect, looking at this from a more Anglophone perspective. I have rights. Once again, ta is for is. It doesn't change based on what is. It just is always ta. Kyarta is for rights. And agum, interestingly, is at me. The point of this one and the next one is that Irish uses prepositions very heavily. You don't say, I have rights. You say rights are at me. And that's kind of what you're seeing here. The same exact thing for if you want or need something. I don't want something, it's from me. The things that I have, they're at me. Cool, I've got them. The things that I don't have are away from me. And I want those things. I want to bring them towards me. So ta kyarta wem. I want or need rights. The UAI is pronounced like a WE in English, approximately. So ta kyarta wem. I want or I need rights. The exact same construction, but changing agum to wem instead of meaning I have them, it means I want them. The last phrase here that we're going to kind of dissect in the next few slides, ta me lodgers. So ta once again is the same to be. Me is for me. That's me. It's different from Misha for reasons we don't need to go into. You can forget that Misha exists except in the first phrase. Lodgers means strong. A quick note on lodgers. The D there sounds a whole lot like a J, and the R almost sounds like a D in the way it's kind of said. And that is because both of those are next to an I. If they were next to an A, they'd be pronounced similar to how they are in English, next to an I or an E. It's a Z and a Z for the D and the R. That means I am strong. Let's actually break this down into things that matter. What did we see there? The first biggest takeaway is that Irish puts the verb first. Is Misha Jeffrey, ta met lodgers. You know, I am Jeffrey, I am strong, but the am there is going first. Prepositions matter a lot. Everything you say in Irish, you can use a preposition far more than English. You use it to express common things about knowing, having, wanting, seeing. A lot of these things are done through prepositions, and those prepositions actually change their form based on who you're talking about. And there are two words, I missed the W there, for to be. One is for identity, like is Misha Shahrun, I'm Shahrun. The other one is more temporary statements, ta kyarta agam. Ideally, that should be a permanent statement, but it's not identity in the same way that is Misha Shahrun, I am Jeffrey is. So use ta there for the more temporary or non-identity like things. And this same pattern here, this very simple pattern of ta something agom or ta something wem is a really, really strong pattern you'll see repeated all over the place in Irish. So the next few slides, I'm just going to go through this in a lot of detail, get some practice on that. Does that make enough sense to people as a background of the language and how this is working? Any questions? There are no dumb questions here. This is a very different language to English. Anything there, feel free to ask a question and put something in the chat. Okay, cool. So starting in reverse order here, if we want to say, we're looking at I'm strong, but we want to say this for somebody else. Irish is easy in the fact that the verb isn't going to change. In English, we say something like, you know, I want food, but it becomes he wants food. Irish doesn't do this. The verb is always going to be the exact same, at least for ta. Some other ones will change, but in this case, there will be no changes. So if I wanted to say, for example, you are strong, feel free to take your guess in the chat. It's very simple here. Or if you want to say something, let me know. But could I have someone tell me how you'd say you are strong in this case?
Yeah, Tatu Ladu.
Exactly. And so what we see there exactly is that you can just plug and play everything from the left side here into the phrase. Tatu Lodgers. If you want to say something about we or us, it's mwids. Oh, actually, what I should do is I'm going to step back and I'm going to run through the pronunciation of these and how you say this. So me is I or me. Tu is you. Shay, once again, it's an S next to an E or an I, so it's sh. Shay is he or it. There's no specified word for it in Irish. She, said exactly the same as it is in English, is for she, or once again for it. Wids, so the U there becomes like an MW sound, and once again the D sounds a lot like a J. Wids is we. Shiv is for all of you. Once again, the S is a SH because it's next to an I, and the BH there is said like a V. There's a whole linguistic reason for this, but it's easier just to say BH is a V, and it pretty much always is in Irish. So Shiv is all of you. And then Sheed, once again, it's the sh sound there is for they. You can use Sheed like you use it in English, either for a group of people or for a single person in a gender neutral way. You can use it both ways in Irish. So if you wanted to say now, they are strong, how would you say that? Feel free to put something in chat, say something.
Toshid Lodger.
There you go, Toshid Lodger. And similarly, she is strong, ta, she Lodger. Obviously, very simple Irish here. Sorry if this is a little bit boring for some people who have a lot of Irish already. I'm not sure what the background is for everyone here, and I want to give an introduction for anyone, especially watching online. But that is this. And the other point of why did I do it like this? This is the exact kind of templating that I'm going to try and build up to, where you've got a basic phrase, and now you can input anything you want into it. If you're at a, if you're at a protest, for example, you're starting off your speech, Tom Woods Lodgers, we are strong. And that immediately is not a bad way to start it off. And even if you go into English a bit after that, that's a way that you can start to use this. This is a phrase that you can templatize in that way. And so I want to show a lot of that off and how to do that. The next one, looking at prepositions. So I missed the so the wem here, the talk character wem, I missed to put the thing below it there. It means I want or need rights. You can also use it in the sense of I am demanding this. You can use this construction of ta and wem to kind of express a demand. So what are we looking at here? Ta is for is, character is for rights, and so is rights and then from someone. Is rights from someone, rights are from someone, means they don't have those rights, they're far away. If you want those rights, you have to bring them to you. So those rights are from you, and it means that you want them. The way you say this, you can think of the UAI again as a WE in English. So for from me is wem. From you would be wet. Kind of like when something has water on and you say it's wet. It's pronounced very similarly to that. For from him, this one is the exception one, Y. Said like the letter Y. From her, wehe. The TH here in Irish is always an H sound. So you have the we for UAI, and then he for the end of that, wehe. For from us, it's when. Said almost exactly like, and you're like, oh, when are you going to be here? It's almost exactly the same sound there. So when, from us. And I haven't, oh no, that didn't get in there. I'm going to very quickly throw in here. There we go. We will throw those back in there. So that's in there correctly. Wev. Once again, that BH is a V sound, and you have the we again, wev, from you all. And wahoo or wahoo is going to be from them. You know, takiartu wahoo. Sorry, colloquially you put a B at the end of it. Forget what I said there. Takiartu wahoo. You know, it would be they want rights, or you know, rights are from them. So once again, I know this can get a little bit repetitive, but to get practiced, either writing it or speaking it if you want. For the first three here, how would you say he wants rights? Feel free to type or say it out loud if you would like. Didn't you know that is fine. Also, you don't have to type this out loud. That's totally fine. Takiarta Y is how you would say this. He wants rights. Takiarta Y. So once again, this is rights are from him. The Y is from him. The kiarta is for rights, and ta is simply making this expression actually work. Kind of glues it all together. So ta kiarta, why he wants rights. In a very similar manner, we want rights. We're going to say ta kiarta again, and then we look to say, how do we make this a we thing? How do we say rights are from us? We see when there, ta kiarta when. And we see that exactly here. If we want to go on the last one to, you want rights. Once again, ta kiarta, the exact same construction. And then what are we saying about those rights? They are from you. This means you want them. Ta kiarta wet. Exactly what, oh no, another typo. I thought I'd gotten all of those. Ta kiarta wet. Exactly like that. Ta kiarta wet. You want rights, or you need rights, or maybe you are kind of in a way demanding rights. If you're saying the thing of like, you know, the protest, it's like, you know, what do we want? Rights. This is the same want you would use there. Cared to when, you know, what do we want? This is the same exact the word you use if those kind of demands. Yeah. Is this listening to me? Yes, it is. Okay. Going to go through this last one again. Relatively quickly this time. I think we're picking up on the pattern here. Actually, I should step back first. Any questions on this pattern? Does this kind of make sense the way that we're constructing these phrases? Okay, awesome. Once again, here I'll go through this one a bit quicker so I don't bore everybody. Takiarta agam. I have rights. And the I have is really in the agam, which means at me. If I have something, it's at me, it's with me, it's right next to me. So if rights are at me, then I have them. Takiarta agam, I have rights. So to go through these next ones, they have rights. Takiarta aku. Most of these are pronounced kind of like what you expect. I'll just go through here real quick. Agam, at me. Agat, at you. this for at him, it's ega, almost like the word egg with an at the end, ega. The AI for at her is also kind of like an sound, so eka. Very similar to ega, just it's a k instead of a g that you hear there. Gwyn, the AI there forms kind of a WI, kind of like how we see in the last one, a Gwyn. And similarly, a Gwiv, the BH again being a V, and then Oku, or sometimes you hear Okub, for at them. So if we want to use this, for example, you all have rights, Takyarta Ogriv. And for you have rights in the singular, Takyarta Ogat. And that is how this kind of construction works. A lot of things end up looking like this. And any questions on this sort of stuff, how this is done? Okay. Awesome. Okay, so that is there. We were butting up against the time I promised to take from you, and I realize it's a Saturday, so I'm not going to take too much more. I'm going to end this on what I should have moved to the end of this slide, which is this one right here. For next week, if you could read through the citizens information page, it's like 2 pages or something, it's quite short, on the FOI Act. That would be really useful as a primer to this. Most of the next session is going to be dedicated to using the FOI Act. I'll give a brief introduction of it, of what the rights are, and then I'll go into in detail, here's how to write it, here's some examples, here are a lot of templates, and we can practice writing some of those two together, in addition to doing some more general Irish practice. If you are like me and end up drowning in legalese sometimes, even though you're not anywhere close to a lawyer, the full act is right there at the bottom link. You're welcome to read it, but there's no pressure. Nobody needs to subject themselves to that much legalese. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming. If you have any feedback on this, like I said, this is my first time doing this sort of thing. Please send me an email if there's something you didn't like or something you loved. I would love to hear that. And otherwise, thank you so much for coming and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Good night.
Garma, got Shahrood.
All true. Slangafol. See ya.
Slán go bhfuil.
Bon.